is Brian Doberteen at Agile IT.
And I'm Sean Spicer, your usual host here, head of marketing. Today, what we're going to be discussing is comparison between Azure and AWS. So, Brian, you are AWS certified.
Yep.
As well as Azure DevOps certified.
Correct.
So you've ridden kind of both sides of this fence.
Yep, absolutely.
And we're not really going to just make a decision or value judgment on which is better, which is best. This is more of a neutral look at the similarities and differences between the two.
Yep.
So let's get started.
Alrighty. Okay, so this is just a quick overview of the different services and the nomenclature. Amazon Web Services is Linux based, and obviously Microsoft Azure is, relies heavily on the Microsoft stack. They do support Linux, but it's not their main thing.
And this is often something that I've seen when I'm reading and the comparisons of the two is if you're comfortable in Linux, if you're comfortable with bash scripts and you've just kind of lived in Linux for a while, AWS is a little bit easier to get started in. Whereas if you're familiar with the Microsoft enterprise structure, you're going to be working with Windows servers. Things are arranged around Active Directory for identity. So you've already got some knowledge going in about what it is.
Absolutely. That's one of the very nice things about, if you're a .NET shop, working with Azure it's just a natural way of doing things. It integrates really well with Visual Studio, for instance, and that, with Teams, everything is nicely, tightly integrated, and takes advantage of all the great products that Microsoft has to offer. AWS is again, as Sean mentioned, it's geared towards kind of a do-it-yourself approach. If you want to integrate things, there's not that tight integration with, for instance, Azure DevOps offering. There's not really an exact equivalent for that on AWS.
So is AWS more API driven while Microsoft is more kind of native integration?
Yes, that's true. But Azure also offers plenty of APIs. There's the Microsoft Graph is their new, or not that new, but their main API for accessing Azure resources, especially Azure Active Directory resources. But yeah, so let's see, continuing on, billing per second. Yep, they both bill the same way. It's pay as you for what you use, and it's on the per second granularity. Amazon AWS uses the terms EC2 for their Elastic compute cluster, or Elastic Cloud, something like that.
I thought it was Elastic Cloud Computing.
Elastic Cloud Computing, yeah, you're right. And VPCs, which is their networking, virtual networking concept. Azure uses just the term virtual machine, makes it a little more clear. Then there's Elastic Block Store in AWS, kind of coincides with blob storage on Azure. Then there's provisioned IOPS, which is the cream of the crop for AWS in terms of drive access for data access. It's much faster. It comes at a cost, of course, as does Azure Premium Storage. Then we have Lambda functions, which is AWS's serverless platform, and which very closely coincides with Azure functions. Recently, AWS seems to be making strides ever since .NET Core has become more prevalent to support that in their Lambda functions because of the cross-platform nature of it. Azure Functions, of course, is geared the same way. You can run, different runtimes, different languages, but it plays really well with .NET Framework, .NET Core.
And we're going to talk a little bit more about that. So the thing about Lambda or functions on both, now that's just you deploy code and you don't worry about what it's running on or anything, correct?
Correct. So the serverless concept is you don't have to spin up a VM. There's no need for anything, but as Sean mentioned, just getting your code out there and setting up an endpoint or there's a number of ways to trigger the function through notification, through queuing, and you can also set up API gateways to trigger the function as well. Set up like a RESTful endpoint to get that to fire. Very similar to Azure Functions again. Then we have auto scaling on AWS. Ties in with the notion of VM scale sets and the app service auto scaling, which is very nice. It's almost makes it, it's beyond simple to set up the app service auto scaling. Then we have SimpleDB is AWS is offering for sort of a key value store. And again, table storage would be the Azure offering. Elastic File System is the AWS it's their offering that allows a common file store that can be accessed across different EC2 or VMs. And then there's file storage on Azure, which is treated like a SMB file share. AWS Glacier, which is for long-term, cold storage, hence the name Glacier, of infrequently accessed data. Then there's, which equates to Azure Archive.
And I think they both have the same requirements, that it's data that's not accessed for over 180 days and can withstand up to 5 hours to recall that data.
Correct.
Yep.
Correct. So it's something that if you have data that's not very frequently used, it's a great place for it because it's a lot cheaper to store there. Then Elastic Load Balancing for AWS, and then for Azure is the Azure Load Balancer and Application Gateway. Both, do roughly the same thing. RDS is the managed database offering from AWS, where you don't have to worry about, spinning up a VM to host your SQL Server or your MySQL database or what have you. Azure has, of course, managed database services like Azure SQL.
And we did a really cool presentation where we were talking about end of support for SQL Server. And I believe it was Rob Davies from the Azure DCO group was talking about these and the big benefits about moving to managed SQL, where you don't have to worry about upgrades, you don't have to worry about security cycles, things like that.
And backups, which is a big thing too.
Yep.
So it's really nice. It comes at a little bit of a premium, but it's well worth it, just in that this time savings alone, not having to deal with management, and because that can.
Well, I'm just in marketing, so I can make the joke. I still can't figure out like SQL licensing per core, and it's confusing.
I think you need a PhD to understand some of those licensing models at times.
I love my engineers.
All right, moving on. So the way that Azure or AWS controls access to their environment with what they call IAM, stands for Identity and Access Management. And on the Azure side, the users and the roles and the groups are part of Azure Active Directory, which again, if you're Microsoft centric, it just fits right in with what you've been doing. Let's see. You can. It's very granular. You can control access to whatever services offered by Azure through AAD, Azure Active Directory, as well as there's a notion of subscriptions, which you can kind of compartmentalize your resources through that notion. AWS is not as fine-grained, but they do. It's still achievable on AWS. It's just not quite as seamless. But it's it's there. And in AWS also, with jumping through a few hoops, you can use an LDAP like identity provider to kind of integrate with an Active Directory instance, but again, it's not the same experience as it would be on Azure.
Yeah, so I'm fairly familiar with Azure AD. Do they have groups in AWS IAM, or is that actual individual access controls?
They do have groups. They excuse me. They have the notion of groups and roles. Groups would be administrators, and then you would assign a role to those groups. And that's considered a best practice on AWS. You don't want to assign roles to individual users.
Yeah, same in AD.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Because it's just a lot easier to remove someone from a group rather than worrying about their individually assigned access permissions. And yeah, that mostly covers it, I think.
Yeah, let's touch on DevOps.
All right. So in AWS, their offerings are, excuse me, they have the notion of AWS Code Pipeline, which is an end-to-end sort of solution for getting code pushed to a repository, kick off the build stage, and from there kick off the deployment stage. The whole CI/CD thing. Code build is what becomes part of code pipeline, and it handles the actual compiling of the code. And it depends on what platform you're using, but a lot of time, or in my experience, we've had to implement a Jenkins instance to actually handle some of the more obscure parts of the build process. For instance, we were a firm I was at a couple years ago. We had an Angular app that had a lot of moving parts to get it to build, and to get that to work, we had a Jenkins instance that AWS Code Build would call and would report back successful.
And what's Jenkins do? Is that just testing, or?
Jenkins is a open source CI/CD tool. It's platform agnostic. You can run. It has tons of open source support for different types of runtimes. You can compile something on .NET Framework 2.0 if you wanted, all the way up to you do .NET Core. You could build a Java app. You could build an Angular app with no backend. It's very flexible. Not the most intuitive at times, but once it's set up, it does a good job. AWS Code Deploy is also a component of AWS Code Pipeline. That takes the artifacts from the build process and actually gets them out to your machines, your EC2 instances. I believe it can target containers as well, but for the sake of argument, we'll just say you install an agent on a VM, an EC2 VM, and it will talk to Code Deploy and get your binaries where they need to be in order for the application to do what it needs to do. And as it mentions, you can also target on-premises machine or on-premise data centers, which is nice, and Azure can do that as well. AWS CodeStar is one of their newer offerings. I think it's geared towards making it an easier process. There's a lot of templates or / quick starts to get an app deployable and with the minimal amount of configuration.
Yeah, and I played with that a little bit just recently, and it kind of reminds me a little bit about the Azure DevOps. And having it all in one place. But I was able to put together a Java deployment, and it was 6 clicks.
Exactly.
And then link my GitHub, and then move code from GitHub and somebody else's repository to mine to feed it in.
Mm-hmm.
And me not being a developer, but an almost criminal tinker, was trying to recreate what you guys were doing with the Parts Unlimited demo we did about a month or two ago.
Oh, sure.
Yeah,
Sure.
and seeing if I could do it. So spoiler alert, I couldn't yet, but I'm going to keep working on it. I'm just excited about all of these technologies.
Yeah, and again, so AWS CoStar, I think if you were to sum it up, it abstracts away a lot of the details of the code build, code deploy, code pipeline. It kind of just handles that for you and makes it pretty straightforward. A big difference that I can think of is the lack of work item tracking, which is one of the great features of Azure DevOps. But for deployment, it's all there. For if you are in a microservices architecture, AWS supports Docker in their Elastic Container Service. They also have EKS, which is the Elastic Kubernetes Service. Same thing. You push your container instances or your container images to the repository. Kubernetes will notice that there's a new one, pick it up, deploy it, and you can. It's pretty flexible in terms of different stages and different environments. Then there's also AWS Lambda, which we touched on earlier, is their serverless platform, great for functions that don't need to have any underlying infrastructure. They're just, typically they'll receive notification again from simple notification service or simple queue service on AWS. And then there's also other ways to get it to trigger, but it totally takes away the necessity to spin up anything really.
Yeah.
Right.
And where I've played with functions is there's a feature in GitHub that you can actually deploy functions from GitHub if your repository is set up for it.
Correct.
Yep.
Correct.
And there's a couple of cool tools I've used with HubSpot for that.
Okay.
Yep.
And I believe that's something I forgot to mention on the last page was that the code deploy, I'm 99% sure that the AWS Lambda is a target for that as well. So deployment, there's a variety of ways to get your code to where it needs to be.
One of the things that you guys went over in the DevOps demo where we built Parts Unlimited was the fact that it was almost just drag and drop, a couple of clicks to, instead of deploying that code infrastructure to Azure, you could deploy to AWS. Will AWS deploy to Azure?
I
can probably make it do it, but it's not going to be.
Yeah, it's something that's not. It's probably not supported out of the box, or maybe it is, but it's not. It won't be as seamless, certainly.
Yeah, this is one of the reasons I really want to move our tech talks to be more of a video format. You guys should have seen the look Brian just gave me.
Okay. And good old infrastructure as code on AWS. Their main thing is AWS CloudFormation, which is the equivalent of Azure ARM templates, roughly. It can be a challenge to work with for certain. I find it very complex. Just to spin up a simple VM takes, a few dozen lines of code to do something that should be simple. There's AWS Systems Manager, which handles configuration management. It sort of runs in parallel to DSC on Azure.
Yeah, desired state configuration.
Desired state configuration, correct. AWS OpsWorks, very similar again. It goes a little bit deeper than AWS Systems Manager in terms of getting your machines to, again, a desired state. Uses Chef, I believe, as its main
configuration.
Yeah, configuration framework. And then AWS config is policy as code is a very good way of putting it. It is designed to sort of give you a historical view of configuration changes to your components over time. You can set up rules that will notify or block configuration changes. Gives you an audit trail of anything that has changed, and can be very handy in environments such as if you're running a PCI, if you're in a PCI environment, or HIPAA for that matter. And yeah, so it's nice to get that audit trail. It ties in with CloudTrail, I believe. Well, I don't know if it ties in, but it runs in parallel to CloudTrail, but it's more intelligent. And AWS Monitoring and Logging, CloudWatch is their main logging. Well, yeah, it's their monitor. So you would set up a rule, for instance, say if a EC2 instance goes above 80% CPU usage for a period of over 5 minutes, it will trigger an alarm. And then you can take action on that alarm. You can trigger, auto scaling. You can trigger a notification. There's a number of different channels for it to make it known that something is up and needs attention. AWS X-Ray, as it says on the slide, monitors containerized services, distributed applications and microservices, which are sometimes a little more difficult to gain visibility into because of the fact that they are running within a container, and that level of that extra layer of abstraction sort of can be opaque at times, but X-Ray will enable you to see inside, hence the name X-Ray. And AWS CloudTrail is an audit tool to make sure to record everything that's being done in your environment. So say someone logs in and decides to modify one of your RDS database instances, and when you ask that certain person about it, they disavow any knowledge, but CloudTrail will give you the absolute proof that was done. Very useful, again, in compliance environments. So yeah. Platform as a service. AWS has their Elastic Beanstalk, which is it's a sort of an all-in-one creation of an app from scratch. It will take care of creating load balancers, VMs. It'll do the the deployment of the code. I believe the build will still takes place on a local machine or local. It doesn't have to be local, but on some instance, it doesn't. I haven't used it too much, but it's an all-in-one solution to get a app from code to production with minimal friction. As it says, automatically deploys, provisions, and scales, and it sets all that up for you. It's pretty nice, and it's platform agnostic. You can set up, you can run something on Apache just as easily as you can on IIS. And I believe that's one of the few AWS offerings that will target IIS. They're again, as Sean mentioned, they're more Linux centric. So, but it is an interesting offering. I haven't used it too much, but for a very quick and easy way of getting code to a production environment or even a dev environment, it could certainly fit the bill.
Yeah, one of the things I like about the Elastic Beanstalk is how quickly you can. It's not even really a LAMP stack at that point, but to set up in digital marketing, you pretty much live in LAMP stacks, which is Linux, Apache, MySQL, and PHP. Mm-hmm. And it's those four things need to be set up before you have a web page, a WordPress instance, a Magento e-commerce shop, And again, I love my engineers because they're always setting it up. But for somebody who's just got that idea, they want to set up an e-commerce system, they can put it together this way. What's the closest Azure equivalent to this? Because I know there are templates out there.
Yeah, that's a good point. There's the GitHub repository full of quick start templates, which cover just about anything you can think of. For instance, deploying a WordPress instance, you find that template, deploy it, and it takes care of the rest.
The other thing I've found is the Azure Marketplace is just doing a search for WordPress. There are a lot of solutions out there that will instantly deploy, like cPanel, get everything managed for you.
Sure.
Yeah.
And I believe that Elastic Beanstalk also has some out-of-the-box templates that are available, at least from within Visual Studio. Again, if you wanted to do a LAMP stack, you just select that, and it will take care of the rest. Again, it's nice for a little bit less technical audience.
Hi.
Not that there's anything wrong with that, but yeah, it definitely has value. And just in terms of getting stuff out there as quickly as possible without having to involve engineering. Version control, yeah, AWS, one of their more recent offerings. Well, I say more recent, it's been a few years, but they have the AWS code commit, which is their Git repositories. Ties in again with code pipeline, as the code pipeline integrates very well with it as its source. Code pipeline can also use GitHub and other source repositories, but code commit is very nicely integrated. You don't have to worry about extra steps of authentication or creating personal access tokens in GitHub and all that good stuff to get it to work. It's very vanilla Git repository. There's not too much more to be said about it.
For amazing as Git is, Git really is vanilla. That's a good term for it.
Right. So
now,
go ahead.
Does code commit have a GUI like GitHub, or is it all command line like what I'm used to with Git?
It has, you can view the repositories and the files. It's not as in depth or is not as full featured as GitHub or even Azure DevOps repos, where you can actually go in.
Those are beautiful.
Yeah, where you can go in and edit the file from within the browser if you had to do a really quick emergency hotfix, for instance. And to be honest with you, I'm not sure where AWS Code Commit is at with those sort of features at this point. But again, it definitely fits the bill for a Git repository.
Right, and just kind of covered it right there in terms of what is in Azure compared to AWS. Is you've got the repos, but then Microsoft bought GitHub.
Right.
And we're already starting to see a lot more integration with GitHub and Azure DevOps and with the entire Microsoft ecosystem.
That's very true, yeah.
I'm really amazed at how well Microsoft's been managing their philosophical shift to really support open source.
Yeah, it's been amazing. I think that's been one of the most exciting parts about Microsoft lately in the last few years is their move towards being cross-platform and supporting Linux. I mean, you can even run Linux now. As some people know, you can run Linux on your Windows 10 box. It doesn't have all the features, but
I was browsing this morning through the social networks and saw an ad. There's a company that makes the Hack laptop, which is geared towards kids. And now instead of the laptop, they've got a thumb drive that if you've got Windows 10, plug the thumb drive into your computer, you get your Linux environment for your kid to go in there, play around and learn coding using Scratch, learning JavaScript.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, some rudimentary Python, but it's there.
Yeah.
You can run Linux and Windows. It's no longer like the crazy stuff on a thumb drive.
Right.
To like reboot, okay, now I've got Ubuntu running on a really, really slow thumb drive.
Right.
Yep.
Yeah, and it's great to be able to have access to a bash console when you need it. PowerShell is great, and command line is only about what 30 years old. So
I love my batch files.
yeah, I've written a few batch files myself, and I'm still to this day some of that syntax is makes my head hurt. But and also there's also PowerShell 6, which is cross-platform. It's supported on Linux as well as Windows.
Cool.
And that's another exciting development for people that are, have been working with PowerShell and don't want to switch over to using Bash scripting. They can use PowerShell and accomplish just about, I would say, 99% of what they would be able to with native shell scripting on Linux, but just with the PowerShell language. All right.
No images for this one, but the partner ecosystems. We were talking about this right beforehand. It really came up when we were talking about security, is that Microsoft has all of these great built-in security controls, whereas AWS, they're more concerned about the security of their data centers. And I think that's primarily because Microsoft is focused on like enterprise computing. So you have your infrastructure in Microsoft, whereas AWS is more developer focused. Is that
yeah,
kind of the
yeah, I think that's a good way to sum it up, actually. For instance, there's the Microsoft Intune offering, which is mobile device management and all that good stuff, and there really is no out-of-the-box equivalent on AWS. There are third-party solutions to accomplish those things, but the way it's so nicely integrated with in Azure is just makes it it's just almost a thing of beauty.
And so I am involved in the online communities and talking with sysadmins on Reddit, TechNet, the various blogs, and there are for the people who want to naysay Microsoft, there are equivalents to just about every security tool that you're going to gain in Azure or through Microsoft 365, but they're all point solutions.
Mm-hmm.
And so you get caught stitching them together.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
That's again the integration of all across the board of all the different Microsoft products and capabilities is just great.
Yeah, that term we keep hearing again and again from our guys at Microsoft, the that single pane of glass,
mm-hmm.
that you're not going to 10,000 places. Someday digital marketing will be that way, and I will be so happy. But yeah, but that also goes into other solutions as well. Is that both Azure with the Azure Marketplace, AWS has their partner marketplace?
Yeah,
But you can go in and you can find these solutions just searching for what you need.
Right. For instance, I have deployed an OpenVPN solution through the AWS Marketplace. It was 2 clicks, and I had an OpenVPN access server ready to go. So, they are out there, but they do need to be stitched together manually. And another thing too is for CSPs or MSPs, the ability to really easily work with other tenants in Azure. It exists to some degree in AWS, but it's not quite as seamless. You can do it by setting up what do they call it? Cross account access. But it's not quite the same. It's so nice to be able to go into Partner Center and just manage someone, one of your clients' Azure environments without having to worry about any real setup other than them entering a partner ID in Azure portal, and that takes care of it. So management for the for service providers is one of the nicest features that I've seen.
Well, and in terms of those one-click installs, there will be links in the YouTube description below or in the blog write-up that will be out tomorrow. But really cool way to see that is we had a tech talk with, I believe it was David Branscombe, that showed us how to deploy Kali Linux in Azure.
Mm-hmm.
And it is one click, a couple things to configure, set up your certificate, and in a 10-minute tech talk, he was able to spoof Facebook using Kali Linux. So yeah, those one-click installs are great. Well, I think we are getting close on time. Going to go ahead and end the recording, open up the floor for questions. Again, for those of you watching online, Agile IT Tech Talks are a benefit for our MSP and CSP clients, where they are able to get some time with an engineer. At the end of the recording, we open up the lines for questions, but those are kept out of the recording to protect our clients' confidentiality. So thanks for watching. Have a great day. Give us a like and follow. And I will see you all next week with, again, it's going to be David Branscombe talking about some of the new privacy and security features that were announced last week.